All right, Laura, thank you so much for hanging out with us. When you came on the podcast, I don't know how long it's been now. Maybe it was in the summertime. That was so fun for me to record with you. I was like, I love the way your brain works. I love the way you describe things. And you have coming up, and I'm just going to put out there, this is not like an infomercial. This whole episode is not going to be selling what's coming up. But this is a reason why I'm like, I got to get you back on the podcast is because you have coming up in the new year where you're looking at doing a course on boundaries. And I want to go into in just a minute why you want to do that course, what you're thinking with that course. But Amy and I have been recording episodes the last few weeks with different professionals. One was, are all cheaters narcissists? And that was a topic the professional had brought to us. And then we had a psychologist come on, Alexandra, and she specializes in personality disorders. And so we're talking about, when is it a personality disorder? When is it not? And the message that really stuck out to me in talking to her was the importance of boundaries.
Mm.
The importance of boundaries anyway, whether there's a personality disorder or not, but then how, when we have something like addiction, or we have something like infidelity, or we have something like a personality disorder, having these boundaries is essential for our well being. And I'll say with personality disorders, essential for your emotional and mental survival. And so my brain's already been on boundaries. And then you have this course coming up. And I thought, okay, perfect time to have you come and just talk about boundaries with me. And before we hit record, I was saying to Laura, if I could hope that you as listeners get anything out of this episode, it's that if you feel like you're not doing boundaries well, you are normal. And if
Mm.
you feel like boundaries don't work, you're normal. And if you hate the idea of boundaries or you love the idea of boundaries, but they feel impossible, you're normal. And really just to talk about maybe some of the challenges with. So it was a really long winded introduction, but Laura, welcome. And do you mind just starting with, for you, why did you want to create a boundaries course?
I think see a need, fill a need is where I'm coming from there. Cause I think so many of the clients that I meet with, and even just in participating in those intensives that we offer, that is a common theme that comes up on both the men's side and the women's side of I need boundaries, or why does she have boundaries? Or why don't I have boundaries for my own behaviors? All of that. So that's something that just you see the need. I want to fill that need.
You're so right with the intensives. So Laura will come teach at our intensives, and you've done a few boundary courses. And it feels like or workshops, when you do a boundary workshop, it's almost, I'm trying to think of an analogy. It's almost like you have people who are starving and then you give them this delicious meal, but they're like, okay, I need more. Don't leave. And so there's this constant, oh my gosh. And you just can't like figure out boundaries in an hour.
Yeah, and it's something that has to build, right? Like, you can sit down at Thanksgiving dinner and eat all of the food and still not get to taste all of the food because there's so much offered, right? And that kind of is how boundaries is. Like, I could give you all the information in an hour and it would feel like a fire hose and you'd go home and not remember much of it. So we kind of like dip our toes in and then it's okay, go home and metabolize this. And
Mhm.
then, but in an intensive, it's like, well, go home and metabolize this and reach out for questions. And that's when I was like, well, maybe we should offer one that's like once a week so that we have that opportunity to metabolize and then come back and ask questions and dip a little bit farther in.
That is so good. And I don't know if you have all the details for the course yet, but do you know how many weeks you're going to offer that support?
Yeah, my plan is about 6 weeks. So it's just like a small chunk. And then at the end of 6 weeks, if we feel like, you know what, I'm not done, I need to keep going, then we can talk about it at that point. But I want there to be like okay, I can do this for 6 weeks kind of thing.
I love that. So when you have somebody come to you, say it's a client, and they say, Laura, I suck at boundaries. Like, where for you, where do you even start with that? How would
Mm,
you respond to that?
yeah. First, I want to validate that I think everybody who is in pain feels like I must suck at boundaries
Mm,
because we tell ourselves a story that if I set a boundary, I'm going to feel better. And that's not always the case. Sometimes we set a boundary that we don't want to set, but we need to set for safety, and it hurts. And it hurts to hold it. And that's not necessarily the evidence that you're bad at setting boundaries, that the fact that you're still in pain. So I
mm.
usually would start there. Like, I'm just going to validate that it hurts. Probably you're not as bad as you think you are. And then we just dig into values. That's where we usually will start is what are you protecting with these boundaries?
Yeah. So tell me more about that. What do you mean by the what are you protecting?
So this is something that I mentioned in the last podcast, but I don't want people to have to go back and find it. So when I was a kid, I was like 4 years old. I was outside playing in my backyard, and the neighbors right behind us had just gotten a new dog, and the dog got free from his chain and came after me and attacked me. And my mom saw it happening and came in and or came outside and chased off the dog and brought me inside. And it was just a while before I went back outside again because there was lots of healing and stuff to do physically. But the next time I went outside, my parents had fenced in our entire property. And so the question I always ask is like, why would they have fenced in their whole property instead of just putting a cage around the dog that attacked me? Right. And so that's where we start. Well, they fenced in their property because they were protecting what was important to them, their daughter, right? And they wanted to protect me not just from that dog, but from anybody or any stray animal that might come and attack me. And so when we're talking about setting boundaries, I want to really be sure that we know what our values are and what our Bill of Rights are, because that's where the pain comes is when those things are being violated. And we need to make sure that we're protecting those from that violation.
Hmm, hmm. It's so funny. My brain wants to go in two totally different directions, but I'm going to start with the betrayed trauma part of me who desperately wants to maintain connection with my loved ones.
Right.
If I heard that story, I would have been like, oh my gosh, yes, that makes total sense. But I also want my husband in the fence. I want
Yeah.
my kids in the fence. I want these people in the fence. So you say protect. I want them in the fence. So how do I bring them in the fence if they're still like if they're harming me?
Okay. So let's slow that down for a second because it's not when I say they were protecting me from the dog, I'm not saying the betraying partner is the dog. I'm saying the behaviors that are harming me are the dog, right? And I want my partner inside the fence with me. I want my partner to connect with me. And I can't do that if the behaviors are in the way of that. So that's what we're fencing out or we're fencing in our values, but we're really protecting from the behaviors that are harmful to the relationship.
I think that distinction is so essential because even the people who have hurt others and acted outside of their own values, a lot of times it feels like when my partner puts this wall to protect their values, it feels like they're shutting me out. And we take that, we as in like the acting out partner, takes that as a personal attack
Yeah.
that my partner's pushing me out and they're
Yeah.
rejecting me. But what you're saying there is no, more often than not, they desperately want you close, but it is those behaviors that are so harmful that they must protect themselves from. And it's those values that are so important that they must protect on the inside.
Yes. And to that point, when I have a person seeking recovery who is saying that to me, like they're shutting me out, what I want to do is say, okay, let's do some work on separating who you are from the things you've done.
Mm,
Because that's usually where the stuck point is on that side of things is I have a hard time separating what I've done from who I am. So when somebody is setting a boundary and saying, I cannot have this behavior in my relationship, then I will internalize that as they don't want me in the relationship. But if I am able to separate what I've done from who I am, then it's easier to say, okay, the behaviors is what's harming the relationship. I don't want that either. And I want to be inside the fence with my partner in that connected relationship.
That concept is so important. And if your brain just blew up with that as you're listening, it's okay. Like for betrayed partners, I remember sitting in multiple groups that I'm running, and I will say, your spouse or your partner is not their choices. And the betrayed part of you can get super activated around, like, yes, they are. Yes, he did this. He hurt me. And yes, he or they chose this. They did hurt you. And there is a difference between who they are and what they have done. And
Mhm,
so it's a hard concept for both partners to unravel. And I also want to be really clear that in unraveling that, we're not giving a pass on behaviors because I think sometimes betrayed partners are scared that if we don't combine those two, that somehow we then will go like, well, it's what you did, but you're okay. Therefore, the acting out is okay.
mm.
And it's yeah, not the case.
Yeah. Okay. I also want to speak to the betrayed partners side of things too, because when you said that, I was like, oh, I can see how that would feel so activating. That person made that choice. That was not something that was out of their control. They made that choice. And I also want to slow it down for the betrayed partners because that is part of the shame that a betrayed partner feels in staying and wanting to work through the relationship, work to heal the relationship is if his behaviors are who he is, then why am I still here? So at some level, there is a hope, a deep hope that this isn't who they are at their core. And I want to see, like, get to the bottom of who they are and get back to what we had or what I thought we had. So while on the surface, hearing that might feel like all my protector parts are out and like, I'm done with this podcast. Like, I want to hold space for that and also acknowledge there's a part of you that wants that to be true as well, or you wouldn't be trying to work through the relationship
Mhm,
right now.
mhm. Thank you for bringing that up because this right here, it just highlights the complexity of betrayal trauma.
Yeah.
That we have those conflicting innate drives, this one for connection and wanting to have that hope and wanting to see the good and this innate need to protect ourselves. And so to have these two parts battling and that they can get activated back and forth and it can make you feel like a crazy person.
Yeah. Yeah.
And let's take this into boundaries too. This battle between the protecting self and wanting that attachment and connection, I think even that sometimes can complicate our own, I want to say desire for boundaries, but also the acting out or implementing of boundaries because there is that fear of if I do fence in what's really important to me, then they might go away or I might lose them or I might be all alone, or we might divorce, or fill in all of those what ifs. So I think even these two innate drives when it comes to boundaries really make boundaries challenging too.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say that's one of the biggest barriers to setting boundaries is the fear of the response.
Hmm.
Because typically the more pushback you get is the biggest indicator that that boundary needed to be there. And that
Oh, say that one more time.
so the more pushback we get on a boundary is the greater the indicator that that boundary needed to be there because that person has benefited from me not having that boundary.
That's an uncomfortable truth and an important one.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a hard one to metabolize for sure, right? Because this is the most important person in your life, usually that we're setting boundaries with, whether it be a family member or our primary partner. Usually it's somebody that's close to us that we're setting a boundary with. And when we're saying, this is what's okay with me and this is what's not okay with me, there is that initial response. It's normal to feel like, Why are you telling me what to do? That's a lot of the response initially is like, why are you trying to control me? And then if we aren't solidly planted in our values and why we need the boundary there, it's going to be a lot easier to start to question, do I have the right to take up that space? Do I have the right to make that request and set the boundary around that request?
Yes, I think that is one of the greatest challenges. And we're not going to dive deep into this today, but can I just ask you the simple question of, can that be overcome? That challenge? If I feel paralyzed of how the other person will respond, is that something that I can get through?
Absolutely. And that's why we take this so slow and we start out with what are my values and what are my Bill of Rights. If I truly believe I have the right to feel safe in my home, if that is something that I believe in my core, I have the right to feel safe, then I will do anything to protect that right. If I don't believe I have the right, or if I question if I have that right, I'm going to be more wishy washy.
What if someone does question that? What if you say that and then instantly the person's like, I want to believe that, or I believe that for other people, but not for me.
Then we're just planting that seed. And maybe we water it a little bit at a time and see if it grows. If that's something that I want to believe that I have the right to, then let's plant that seed and water it, see, and let it grow. We're not going to expect a big full on tree to be there the day that we plant it, right? But we also need to be watering the things that we want in a thriving life as well.
That's really good. We want to be watering the things we want in a thriving life. I think that concept of, well, I'm gonna take it even to the Bill of Rights of, you have the right to thrive,
Mm,
have the right to live a life where you are thriving instead of shrinking. And
mm,
so really slowing down and looking at the things in my life that are adding to that or taking away from that. Mm. Yeah. I like the imagery. Maybe that's why I like having you on the podcast so much. It's really good with the imagery and my brain loves that.
mm.
That's good. Okay. So when somebody is starting their values work and they're saying, I don't really know what I value, how do they do that? How do they start that? Is that something that has to be done in therapy? Is that something that they can start doing on their own?
I actually will give them a couple of short assessments to take that I mean, you can find them online. They're not like clinical assessments or anything, but just what are my values? What are my core character strengths? Just to find out. And they're really just asking questions and you're just answering the questions. And then at the end, it'll say, these are the things that kind of floated to the top as the things that are most important to you. And I tell these clients, I'm like, okay, that's a good start. And now we sit with that list. And does that feel true to me? Does that feel like something that I will seriously protect? And if it's not, then we're gonna just go down the list until we find the ones that we feel like float to the top. Because a lot of times, especially after betrayal, like in this space, honesty is one of the things that tends to float to the top on most people's list, and it's not something that they necessarily would have identified for themselves. But
Mm,
when you live a life where you assume people are showing up in an honest way, and then you find out that has not been the case. All of a sudden, that becomes the most important thing, right? So when we're going through that values list, sometimes it's like, okay, the circumstances that I'm living in right now make these most important. Okay, then maybe we start there setting boundaries. That doesn't mean that forevermore this is going to be the most important thing to me. But for right now, that's where the pain point is. And that's what needs to be protected.
mhm. Yeah, that's really good. And I like that where you almost give permission for people to just simply be where they're at.
Absolutely.
They don't the thought that's coming to my mind is when you go through betrayal, a lot of times, and on any trauma really, that it really disrupts that sense of, I know myself and I know my reality. And
Mhm.
so it's not uncommon for someone who's gone through something really traumatic to feel like they don't even know themselves anymore. They don't know who they can trust. They don't know if they can trust themselves. They don't know. anymore if I like the color red or if I like the color green. I don't know anymore. I thought I knew. What's my favorite fruit? I don't know. Because of that massive disruption to your reality and that reality collapse when you're doing boundary work. I just love that it's not about who I was and figuring that out. It's you today. You get to determine today what's most important to you.
Yes, yes, and 2 of the Bill of Rights that I never will tell people what has to be on their Bill of Rights, but I invite 2 of them to be there. I have the right to be wrong, and I have the right to change my mind, because it's amazing how much freedom and, like, loosening of that paralyzing feeling happens when you can acknowledge and allow yourself to change your mind and to be wrong. If I'm able to allow myself to do that, then all of a sudden making a choice or setting a boundary doesn't feel like a prison sentence because I can change it at any time if and when my circumstances change to allow that.
Mm. That's beautiful. For somebody who is questioning their boundaries that they've already created. So if you had somebody who said, okay, I know what's really important to me right now. I've got these certain boundaries, but I don't know if they are quote unquote, I don't know
Mm,
if they're okay.
mm,
Oh, how would you address that? Because as you're talking about kind of this, I have the right to be wrong, I have the right to change my mind. I can see how that can play into this really questioning of, am I asking too much? Is it too mean? Is it too intense? Am I controlling the other person? So how does someone know if their boundaries are quote unquote good?
mm, mm. Okay. Like, I want to back it up for a second because I think it's important to distinguish between a request and a boundary, right? So I think a lot of times where we feel like, is this a good boundary? It's usually going to be tied to a request that do I have the right to ask that of another person, right? And we can make any request that we want. That's not the boundary though. The boundary is what I'm going to do because we don't want to set up a boundary system where I'm giving all of the power of my healing and my safety to the person that hurt me and saying, please, please don't hurt me this time. It's so empowering to be in a place of, this is what I will do to protect my value. And so when it comes to like, is my boundary okay or is my boundary a good one? Is it something that's going to protect your rights and your values? Is it something that you have complete control over the outcome of? And
Mm,
the answer to those 2 are yes, then it's a boundary that you can hold right now, today. And it is okay to set that boundary, period. End of sentence. And you have the right to change your mind if and when you want to.
that second one, will you slow that down and explain that one? The second one you
Oh,
said,
complete
I
control.
the control of it. Yeah, because I think that sometimes can be confusing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So when we set a boundary, a lot of times it will involve a request. So one that's like really common that we just will talk through is I don't want him to take his phone into the bathroom because that's when there's been a lot of acting out behavior. Okay, so let's just pretend like that's the pain point there. Okay. I can make the request. Please don't take your phone into the bathroom because it hurts. It makes me feel so unsafe when you're in the bathroom with your phone. That's not a boundary though, that's a request, and I can absolutely make the request. When you take your phone into the bathroom, I feel unsafe, and I'm gonna request that you don't take your phone into the bathroom, right? We can make that request. Is the outcome of that request in my control though?
Mm.
It's
Not unless you're gonna follow them to work every day and follow them around and literally hold their hand every minute of the day. It's impossible.
it's impossible. And so that's where we can get into a place of like, "Ah, my boundaries aren't working," or "This isn't helping," or whatever, because I've just given the power over my safety and my ability to feel safe in my home or whatever that right is. And I've handed it to the person that has violated it before, and then I'm just like, fingers crossed that they don't do it again. But if well, where the boundary comes in is when I don't feel safe, then I will do this to create safety for myself. So when you take your phone into the bathroom and I feel unsafe by that behavior, then what I'm going to need to do to create safety for myself is, and we've fill in the blank there. And I know that those who are listening are like, "What is the blank? Fill in the blank. Tell me. I've got my pen out." Because I will say this, like, I have so many clients that will Google, "What are healthy boundaries?" Right?
Mhm.
And we
Like,
want
give
that
me the
shortcut.
list. Mhm.
Yes, we want that shortcut, and we go to groups and we're like, "What are your boundaries, and how do I set a boundary around this?" And you're not gonna hold a boundary that you didn't do the work to determine that you needed. So you have to know how to create safety for yourself. You have because it's gonna be different for everybody. What does safety feel like for me? What do I need to feel safe? So when I don't feel safe, then I will, okay, what am I going to do? And you can communicate that with him or not communicate that with him. That's not necessary because the boundary is yours, what you will do. Right. So that's when I say you have to have complete control over it. Our plan A might be that he honors the request, but my plan B has to be 100% in my control, or I'm not going to feel like there's any safety being created by that boundary.
Yeah, because ultimately, safety really is yours to create. And I love that where you for those who are listening to this, you gave the like, I watched you take your hands and, like, we hand over our power to someone else of, like, "I need you to create my safety." And I there's a part of me that's a little embarrassed to admit this, but I have such a part of me, even today, that shows up of like, "No, I just want you to create the safety. I want you to do the work. I don't
Mhm.
wanna do this work. I just wanna be in a relationship with a safe person so I don't have to." And so I just validate those parts of me that want that. Of course, I want that. But when I do that and when I let those parts of me run the show, I am in essence giving away my power.
Mm.
And then that person can take my emotions and my reality and my power and just go up and down and back and forth and all over the place. And I'm living in relationships with humans, and humans will hurt me and they will disappoint me because that is part of our human experience. Ideally, not to the level that we're talking about here, but I don't want any longer to hand my power over to another human being to control my emotions and my reality, my experience. I want to be able to maintain that sense for myself that I can take care of myself and I can be safe no matter what happens.
Yeah. Oh, that is so good. That is so good. And even as you're talking about that, what's coming to my brain is there's him, there's me, and there's the relationship.
Mhm.
So I am responsible to make sure that I am safe and that I'm creating my own safety, setting boundaries to protect my values. That's my job. And his job is to set his boundaries to make sure he's safe and that he's able to protect himself from those behaviors. But then when it comes to relationally, there does need to be some responsibility on the person that shattered the relationship to create the safety within the relationship. So I don't want to sit here and be like, well, it's my responsibility to only just worry about my own safety. And I am just like this most independent woman. And who cares what he's doing? Because the reality is, if I'm in a relationship with somebody, their choices, their behaviors, they impact me and my ability to enter into a relationship with them. So if that is something that we're working on also is repairing a relationship, we have to also acknowledge that there's gonna be a lot of effort that has to come into creating a safe environment for that relationship as well.
Yes. We had a podcast episode released recently where we talked about a listener question that got brought up of, in essence, like, how do I get to the place where I don't feel the impact of their choices? That
Mhm.
they can do things and it just doesn't impact me. We went at it a different route. We were talking about continual poor behaviors and people wanting to just be okay, just learn how to handle it and be okay. And we talked about the complexities of that. But yeah, when we are talking about a relationship, there has to be that establishing the safety within the relationship that has been completely destroyed. And there has to be that establishing, I was going to say reestablishing, but sometimes it was never even there. And so there has to be that establishing the safety. And while each individual still has their individual responsibility and autonomy to create safety for themselves, we do have the relationship that still needs to be looked at and tended to as well.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I can look like that power differential for a season while we're establishing the safety that has been destroyed.
Exactly. Yeah. And really, when it comes to setting boundaries, like it's about empowering me, right, to create safety for myself. It's also about empowering the other person to make choices. And I
Oh,
deserve to see what choices they're going to make because their choices will inform my choices within the relationship.
okay. So stop right there because I want everyone who's listening to this to go rewind, go back 30 seconds and listen to that again. That I feel like that right there is like a mic drop.
Yeah. Because I think a lot of times when we're in a lot of pain, we want to just control my environment enough so that I don't keep getting hurt,
Mhm.
right? And that can create a false sense of security because I'm not really seeing how the other person would choose if they had choice. So, really, when we're talking healthy boundaries, it's I want to empower myself to create safety, but I also want to empower them to make choices. So, I can make a request of them. How they choose to respond to that request is good information for me about
Important information.
important, critical information about the safety of the relationship and whether or not it's okay to lean back into that, right?
Mhm.
That's where boundaries really can be so empowering. I deserve to know what choices they're going to make because that's going to determine how safe I feel in that relationship.
Yeah, and as long as we are I hate the word control, but as long as we are managing the situation and controlling whether they what they do and what they don't do, and we're putting all this pressure on to act in the way that we need them for our safety, then we actually can never truly feel safe because we don't know that if we don't step out of that hypervigilant state, what they'll actually do. So then our body stays in that continual hypervigilant state.
Yep. Because all your brain will say is they only did that because I made them do it. And so then now my brain is going to say, I have to know exactly what questions to ask, exactly what requests to make, exactly how every behavior needs to be. That's not a place of thriving.
Hmm.
That's a place of surviving, and I would say barely at that.
Hmm. Yeah. That I had forgotten, and I'll use this in my groups that there's this worksheet, and it's in the worksheets from like a narcissistic abuse center, but it has the survivor, no, victim, survivor, and thriver. And so it does these 3 columns and it has, here's what we are when we're in a victim state, and then what it looks like when we move into more of just a survival state, and then what it looks like when we move into a thriver state. And whenever I would share that with a group, I would start with, okay, I have this disclaimer that you have been victimized in a situation. You have been a victim to it. That doesn't mean that we're going to forever be victims. It doesn't mean that we have to take on a victim mindset, but we all start here in this victim category. So if you find yourself straight down this line, it's okay because that's where we all start. But then I would show it. And the hope was, is that through this worksheet, they could see if, okay, I did start here. And I do see some of the places where I am doing some surviving, where before I was just completely in victim. And oh my gosh, I can actually see maybe this little tiny little bit where there's a tiny bit of thriving, maybe. And then I have them another 6 months later, we do it again. And then they go, oh, I'm actually surviving in more than I'm a victim. And I have a solid thriving one. So it gives this roadmap of moving forward, which I love. The thriving is that is our goal to not just survive.
Mhm,
And
mhm,
I believe boundaries are essential to truly heal and move forward. They're
mhm.
not just like a nice idea, they really are essential. And you're probably doing more boundary work than you even give yourself credit for.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the example that I usually will start out with is If you're walking down the street and somebody were to walk up to you and punch you in the face, guaranteed you would run away because I don't wanna be hurt. That's a boundary. Right there, that's a boundary. And I'm not gonna go walk up to everybody on the street and be like, "Just so you know, if you punch me in the face, I'm gonna run away from you." That's just but we sometimes feel like unless I communicate a boundary, then it's not really a boundary.
Mhm.
Or sometimes we feel like just having an idea of, like, how I will respond to a situation, that doesn't really count as a boundary, but it does. That's all a boundary is what is okay with me, what's not okay with me, what I will do when I don't feel okay. And just like when I plant a seed and I want it to grow and I've got deer that come in and like to eat my seeds, I'm gonna protect it. I'm gonna put a fence around it because I need that area to be protected from being stomped on, from being eaten, and I'm gonna create the conditions for that to thrive, and that's what boundaries do for you.
Well, I love that, and then it makes me think about when I have someone who can come into that garden and can be safe and is willing to tiptoe around where I've planted, is willing to nourish the soil with me, is willing to bring nutrients in instead of toxins and poisons in. That's the type of person I want to let in.
Yeah.
That's the type of person that I'm willing to open up the gate and say, come be part of it. But if they're coming in and they're stomping all over because they don't care or they're only worried about them, then I want to protect it.
Mhm.
And so this maybe I want to leave for the person who's seeking recovery and who has hurt somebody, that the boundary that your partner puts in place as they're really learning about their values, I feel like truly can be a roadmap
Mhm.
to actually building more intimacy and becoming closer. So it can be a gift when they are able to really give you clarity about what's important to them and clarity around what they're willing to accept and not accept. You've been given this roadmap and a gift. So you actually know how to come in the garden and be able to be with them and nourish that soil together.
Yeah.
And it's so hard to see that when our own stuff is getting activated around it.
Uh, yeah. And the better that you can set boundaries between you and the behaviors, the safer you're gonna be inside the fence of your partner.
Yeah. Mm, okay. This is beautiful. I don't want to wrap up, but I know we need to because we're at time. But any anything you want to leave, any messages with either the betrayed partner or the partner seeking recovery that you want to end with?
Gosh, what to end with?
Yes. No
Uh,
pressure.
I would just say that you're doing better than you think you are to the betrayed partner, because let's not make this circumstance that I feel pain, that I feel like it's not working, that I feel like I don't know how to do this. Don't make that the evidence that you're not doing it. Because anytime you stand up for yourself and empower yourself to create safety, you are doing the work of healing. And to the betraying partner, the better you can separate yourself from your behaviors and create enough barriers between you and your behaviors, the safer you're going to be for your relationship.
Beautiful. I feel like this is an episode that people could listen to multiple times because everything that you said, there's layers to it. There's
Yeah.
layers of understanding. And that's boundaries. When we first start to learn them, we learn them at one level, and then we can go through the exact same course. And with where we're at and the understanding we have, we learn it a little bit deeper and a little bit deeper. And so I just, yeah, please be patient with yourself in this journey. And such a beautiful message, Laura, of you're doing better than you think.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing of yourself. I will, if it's ready to be released, I'll put in the show notes information not only about you, because Laura works as a marriage and family therapist out of Nevada, and you also do some coaching, and then you also have your boundaries course coming up in the new year. So stay tuned for all of that, but I'll put that in the show notes. And just thank you again. And for all of our listeners, As always, thank you for hanging out with us this week, and we look forward to seeing you all next week.
Hi, guys. It's Laura with Choose Recovery Services. I wanted to let you know about a course we have coming up, a Boundaries Bootcamp. If you've been walking this journey for any length of time, surely you've heard the term boundaries, and you likely have thoughts, questions, or even strong feelings about that word. Questions like, what are boundaries? Why don't my boundaries work? How do I set healthy boundaries? Or why does my partner get to set boundaries that control me? And many others may be at the forefront of your mind. Boundary work is one of the most important skills you can learn, not only to survive the betrayal, but to regain sure footing and confidently live beyond it in solid recovery and healing. This Boundaries Boot Camp is a 6-week course aimed at answering the most pressing questions about boundaries and helping you step out of a place of survival and into a place of thriving, both individually and relationally. There are 2 groups that run concurrently, one for betrayed partners and one for partners seeking recovery. The answer for both is setting healthy boundaries, but the approach is different. Check out the link in the show notes or visit chooserecoveryservices.com for more information.
I'm going to guess that healing from betrayal was something that you never thought you'd have to deal with or hoped you never have to deal with. And doing this type of work is the hardest emotional work you may ever have to do. And you don't have to do it alone. We have coaches and therapists in our Choose Healing groups to help lead you and guide you forward, who have not only learned the tools and resources to help you get to that healing and freedom and peace again, but have walked that path themselves. And in those groups, you're going to find other women who understand your pain, who can say that, me too, and who can give you that support, not just in your weekly group meetings, but that connection between meetings. I encourage you to take that brave step forward, to be vulnerable. It is not easy, but the reward of putting in the work, putting that one step forward as you choose healing and you choose recovery and you choose you, you will be able to move forward and heal.